Welcome again to Kano Iwanyayu broadcast. This is Sangwazi Spiwe Kachidza Mafumo. I am so excited to have our guest today. I know I haven't been live for a couple of weeks because I am in Zimbabwe. So we're broadcasting today in Zimbabwe, and I've got the one and only John Masuku, my good friend, good old Township Boy. Say hello to our followers, John.
Well, thank you very much for having me on your program, Spiwe. I would like to greet all your followers on your program, and I'm happy to be on this program.
That's fantastic. Now, I don't even know where to start, but John Masuku is a veteran journalist. But today, he's not coming to us as a veteran journalist. We are going to talk to him as a living library of what happened in the townships back in the Rhodesian days, 1960s, the 70s. John is going to unravel everything that we have heard about townships. And he himself was born there, right, John?
Yes, I was born at Harare Central Hospital when we were living in the township of National, which is now called Mbare, but we immediately moved to Highfield and we lived in engineering in Highfield. That's where I grew up.
You grew up in engineering, Highfield. And a lot of people, when you look at townships now, they are totally different from back those days when you and me were growing up, right? And very few people really know what was going on because the younger generation, the millennials, for instance, they really have no idea of what it looked like or what it was like. But today we want to reminisce and talk about what it was like when you were growing up in the 60s and 70s. In the townships. A lot was happening that time. The Federation days came and went. And a lot of millennials, they don't even know when you talk about the Federation days. They have no idea what that was all about. But other than the political flavor of that era, there was a lot going on in the townships that, again, a lot of people don't know. Today, I want to bring you as a living library, a moving library of what was going on. Talk to me about what was it like growing up in Highfield during those heydays of political, there was a lot of political things happening in those areas, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Maybe let me start with the political side that you have just mentioned. You know, the end of the 50s was the time of the NDP, the National Democratic Party, led by Joshua Nkomo, leading to ZAPU, and most of the activities, especially during the ZAPU days, were happening in Highfield. And Joshua Nkomo himself lived in my neighborhood of engineering lines. That's where his house, number 399 engineering, was. And at times, he would be stationed at the Chinamora residence. So whenever he came from his trips abroad, where people would congregate at the Chinamora shop or near the house to welcome him, and there would be a lot of singing. Those were the days of Tsuro Tsuro you know. And then it came 1963 when there was the split in the political movement. I remember in my area we had the likes of Robert Marere, who was one of the founding members of ZANU. We also had Bernard Chidzero in the same area. So it was a hive of political activity. And Josiah Chinamano also had a shop overlooking engineering lines, and many other people in business also went into politics or supported political parties. And just next to our house, we lived next to a gentleman by the name Smart Chikumene. He was very active during that time, and he left around 1962-63 to go and broadcast from Moscow. So for many years in the 60s and 70s, Smart Chikumene was broadcasting from the ZAPU studios in Moscow. I hear that he met his fate in Zambia, the time when Joshua Nkomo's house was bombed in Lusaka, and that is around the time that Smart Kumene died. But there are many other people who were main actors in Highfield at that time. It was the center of political activity. I remember when we were in standard in Sub B, when the house next to former President Robert Mugabe was bombed to ashes. We all left our school, and the nearby schools were at Mija at that time, and the Rushingo, which was John Leng, number 2, and the other people around Highfield had to rush to see this house which had been bombed, and indeed it had been bombed to ashes. And you remember those days, we still had a few double deckers like those found in London, and during that time, you also remember that the buses had soldiers, lying by their stomach on the carriers with guns, because there was trouble at any moment when the politicians organized themselves either on their way to Nyandoro Ground. Gwanzura Stadium had not yet been built. There was Nyandoro Ground, where the current Roman Catholic Church in Highfield near the cemetery is. Ground there where they do a lot of carpentry. That's where Nyandoro Grounds were, and that's where a lot of political activity was taking place in Highfield. And then in Mbare National, you had a lot of political activity taking place at a place called the Mime Sodzi. Still there, it belongs to the City Council, the Mime Sodzi Hall. So that was the scenario then. It was a bit unsettled. Those were the days of Madiro. Those were the days of Shanda. Those were the days, when, his township life was also dangerous in many ways because people, were trying to organize themselves, and at times some of their meetings turned violent, especially when the police came to stop them. That was on the political front. But again, on the cultural side, there were many things that... Sorry.
Let me ask you, how old were you then? Because I know we went to school about the same
that
time.
Is the time I was, you can calculate my age. I was born in 1955, and that is the time I just started school. I started school in 1962. So 62, 63, 64 were very hot years. And you remember that is the time when the nationalists were locked up by the Smith government. And also that was the time when the new government of Ian Smith came in, overpowering that one of Winston Field. And it was very radical, very Rhodesian, and it later led the country into a unilateral declaration of independence in 1965. So when these things were happening, we are talking about me being, in sub A. Those days we were doing sub A. We didn't have grade 1 and grade 2. So I did sub A, sub B, right up to standard 6. And were the last of the standard 6s before I went to secondary school. So yeah, that was the time.
Okay, now, I know there's a lot we're talking about here that if we are not careful, we won't even get there. I might have to do a part 2 with you, because this is really interesting, because this is history that a lot of people might not be aware of, But let me move on to another bit. You spoke a little bit about what was happening in the political scenario. Now, I want to talk about, you are from, well, you were born in Highfield, but you're in Ndebele, right?
Yes. I was born when my parents were living in Mbare, which was called location. Even my birth card, which I still have, is written place of residence for my mother, Makumalo, location, which was Mbare. But when I was about 2 months old, our house in Highfield Engineering had already come out. So we then moved to Engineering Highfield when I was a toddler. You were asking that I'm Ndebele, but having that kind of background. It was because my father had come to Salisbury in 1939. He had come to join the Second World War on the side of the British. At that time, since we were colonized by the British, there was a call out there to say all young men who want to join the British Army from their respective countries can join. So my father left his raw home in Essexville, which is now called Esgodini in Matabele South, to come to Salisbury. So we're a generation that came to Salisbury in 1939, and we've lived in Salisbury since that time.
Okay, hold
So
that thought.
yeah, that's
Hold,
the
hold that
background.
thought.
And we interacted with other people who came from many parts of Matabeleland, from many parts of Mashonaland, and so forth. And there were a lot of cultural activities that brought people together to identify these different groups.
Okay, you know where I was going with this question is you explained it very well. You came from your parents came from Isigodini and how they got into Harare and how into Salisbury then. But what I wanted you to talk about is it was a melting pot pretty much. There were lots of people who were coming from Malawi because of the federation and Zambia who had moved into Salisbury to work or for whatever other reason, and people from Masvingo, that time it was
Fort Victoria.
Yeah. Talk to me about that melting pot and how did the people relate to each other, seeing they were from different regions, different countries, which were part of the federation, and how was it like living in an area where really it was a melting pot? And
well, it was very exciting, Spiwe, because what used to happen is people used to meet over the weekends and reminisce, their cultures. The Ndebeles would meet and have their nguzu and these chigicha dances, and the meeting points were usually beer halls. If you remember, in the olden days, the beer halls had different sheds. So you like at Machipisa beer hall, you knew this shed was of people from Gutu, this shed was of people from Slovenia, this one from people from Gwanda, Filabusi. That's where they transacted most of their businesses, like having burial societies, like organizing buses during different holidays like Rhodes and Founders, Christmas, and so forth. So they had secretaries, they voted chairpersons in and so forth, and met at those places to organize themselves. But over and above that, it was the cultural activities that were exciting, because after having those meetings, they would also play or dance to the music, sing and dance to the music of their respective areas, to the extent that they even organized some competitions which were run by the city council, where you would see those coming from Matabeleland. There were so many Ndebele groups here. Most of the people used to live at Mbare hostels. Most of those hostels were occupied by people who worked in industry when it was vibrant. So from Matabeleland, you had choirs, these choral groups, the a cappella groups, like Machomana Choir, led by Mackenzie Ndlovu. You had Slovena Choir, led by Joel Nube. You had the Zamazama Choir, led by Mr. Nube again. You had the Zulu Chaile Choir. All those came from Matabeleland. I know them because my father used to invite them to our home over the weekend just to play and to sing, and people would gather around our fence just to see what we do in Matabeleland. And next door, where the Mtetwas lived, Edward, Solomon Mtetwa, our friends, they would bring in Chekai Mwenje. Chekai Mwenje came from Chipinge, and he would play his mchongo with his family, and we knew that was the dance that came from Chipinge and so forth. Then you went to Masvingo. We had this choir which used to sing. It was called the Manika Tika Choir, very popular choir. I can't remember the full song, but it was very popular even when I joined radio in the early 70s. Their music was very popular. Again, living in the township, you see all these groups, and you got to understand their backgrounds, that the people of Chipinge play this music, speak this language. The people of Masvingo play this music, sing this music, and speak that language. And there were also burial societies from Malawi, like Umozi Burial Society, Ufuli Burial Society, and again, they would sing their Malawian songs there during the burial society times. And they were well organized, by the way. They had buses, they had cars, which would even take people to Malawi. Again, we learned something from them, to the extent that we appreciated each other in the townships, that there live the Shanganis, there the Ndebeles, there those from Mondoro, there those from Wedza and so forth. When someone got lost, you met someone at the shops and they are looking for Spiwe Kachidza from Toko. The moment they mention Kachidza and they mention that she's from Toko, if it was me, I would say, you know what? We are neighbors with the Chinomonas and the Gezana. You remember the Gezana bus service from Toko? They were our neighbors in engineering. So we're neighbors, and I would take them to the Chinomonas and say, this person said he comes from Toko. Can you help them? And indeed, they would help them. Likewise, someone would meet someone from Matebeleland and they would say they are from Escotini or from Philapus. They would bring them to our home and they would 100 times or more than 100% would find who they were looking for in the township. It was easy those days. And also, don't forget that at the bus terminal, like in Mbare, just like what happened in Bulawayo, you also had those loud hailers where the municipal police will be playing very popular music, stop it a little bit and announce that, yeah, we've got Spiwe Kachidza who is coming from Toko. She's looking for her uncle John Masuku who lives somewhere in Highfield and so forth. And within minutes, someone would hear that and they'll say, I know where the Masukus live. Let me take this lady to her uncle's place. That's how, life was like in the township. Very exciting, bringing people together. In various ways, and also with churches that also brought people together.
You know what I find very interesting, like you're saying, you're talking about people who were from Cholocho, and you're talking about people from maybe Mutare, and you knew all these people, and there wasn't any problem because of the differences in tribes or anything, because people just lived together. They knew they were from different tribes, but they lived together, and there was a lot. It seems there was a lot of activity, a lot of activities in those townships, and people were developing themselves. They had all these choirs that you're talking about, which they were not desperate. They were not desperate. There was that division. They couldn't go into white areas, but in wherever in those townships, they themselves they were bringing out a very rich culture, which I think was again a melting pot.
Yeah, just to add on to what you have said, the outskirts of Highfield, like where you had Ford Motors, that's the area where most of the buses are parking nowadays. Kumapranga, that's where a lot of activities would take place. So over the weekend, you go that side, that's where you found your gures and those activities that I was talking about. And then you also had similar activities near your area in Egypt lines, as you go towards the Mukuvisi River. There were again a lot of activities that used to take place. So those are some of the outings families would take. They knew if they go that direction to the side of the Highfields Murimwe Community School, they would find Zhigure and other activities there. And likewise, in your area, the Egypt lines and so forth, they also find different activities. And that way, they were able to entertain themselves during the weekends. Again, like I said, others would be invited to different homes in order to perform. So we knew that over the weekend we would be gathered, at the Masuku residence, because Slovena choir would be there, and we would be gathered at the Mtetwa residence because Chekai Mwenje would be there, and at the Piris, the Umozi Burial Society would be wearing their beautiful uniforms and also singing nice Malawian songs and so on.
Remember Sekur Ndikanyowa? I worked with him.
Yes, I remember the one who used to sing for I think it was the Epworth Theatrical Stratas, and he ended up being a court reporter.
He was. I worked with him. Yes. He was a brilliant writer, and he used to, when we're in the newsroom, we'd ask him, "Sekurukanyowa, sing for us." He just said we're so silly now, but it's interesting. These are people who.
Yes, I think you remind me by mentioning a person like Ndikanyowa and the Epworth Theatrical Stratas that we also had halls like the Cyril Jennings Hall in Highfield, where a lot of activities also used to take place. That's where you would watch different films. Those days, the popular films with cowboys. You remember the Fuzzy Jones and the Buster Crabs of the time, the Batman and Robin. Yeah, we would go and watch them there. The Return of Spartacus, those would be watched at places like the Cyril Jennings Hall, as well as Stoddard Hall in Mbare. And I also used to visit Gweru, to visit my brother who used to work at Butter Shoe Company, and I would watch those at Mukova Hall. In fact, whenever I visited Mukova, I saw some similarities with the life that I would be leading in Highfield, and it was always a nice comparison of those lives.
Well, it's interesting. I've been talking about it because you and me were the same age, just a few months apart, and we went to school in the early in 1962. I went to Nyandoro for my sub A. You went to? Did you went to Mija?
I went to Tsungai next to Nyandoro for a few days, and my headmaster was Mr. Mataure, Mr. Ernest Mataure, who ended up being the town manager of Highfield and then Chitungwiza. So he was my first headmaster. But because my brothers, my siblings, were in Mija, that's when I went to Mija and then transferred to Kudzanai and then Highfield Secondary School. Yeah, so we have similar history one way or another. But Nyandoro, I remember under Headmaster Mpofu, under Headmaster Puai, and so forth.
This is very interesting because you and me, we go way back, and we've been we've known each other for a while, worked together in broadcasting, and we're still hanging on and just still talking about growing up in those townships way back then. I eventually went to the rural schools remember when there was the turmoil, political turmoil, and really it wasn't quite an easy thing for a lot of people. So I had to go to Mutoko to continue my school there and went to boarding school. But now tell me how, I don't want to jump from this very interesting time to during independence. I don't want to go there because I want to invite you again for a part 2 of this, because I see my followers are following now because they didn't know I didn't really do like a broadcast that were coming up, because normally we do on Saturdays, and I'm here in Zimbabwe and there's a lot which was happening. So I finally managed to get you, and I'm hoping I'll be able to get you again. We'll do a part 2. Not this Saturday because I want, maybe on Sunday we'll do a part 2 and then move on from, that time, Township Boys way back then, like we did, Wadzanai Garwe, and they put together our Township Girls book, right? And I'm trying to follow through with the guys who are township boys who grew up in those townships like yourselves, and where we are now. But I would like to invite you next Sunday. Maybe I will do a promo so that people know you're coming up again, and we'll talk about what it was like to then cross over to where we are, and maybe touch a little bit about your breakthrough into broadcasting, because you're one of the veteran journalists. I mean, radio, and then moved on to TV, moved on to podcasting. Now here we are. We're still, still standing. Okay.
Well, while you mentioned that, Spiwe, very interesting. Before you wind up, also during those days, the people who were most prominent were those who owned shops, and the most prominent shop owners were the likes of Machipisa. Who established his shop in Machipisa, which eventually the name which was adopted for the whole shopping center, Mr. Philemon Murambiwa Machipisa. And then you also had the likes of Maera. They played a very important role in developing shops. Makomva was also one of them. You had the Msariris, Shamari Zakanaka, if you remember, Shamari Zakanaka. You also had Tangawabaiwa, also very prominent. The Mwamukas were also very prominent. There are quite a number. Chinamora, also very prominent. And you also had those who ran bus services. And in those days, there were no garages like we see on the outskirts of township. Those buses used to be parked in our township, right, in their yards. So the Gezanas that I was talking about were parked just next to our house. Then down the road were the Mshandra Pamwe buses. Down the road again were the Ngonizashe, and the Ngonizashe, the Ngondo brothers were different. So you had another Ngonizashe parking near the Mareres, the other one near our place around 67th Street. Then the other where engineering begins. Then you had Matambanadzo parked all over. You had different houses. So you had these buses parked in Kenan and other parts of the township. So it was very exciting those days. And, with those buses, we would also play in them would also help the conductors sweep them before they leave for their trips to the rural areas. And as children, we really found that to be very exciting. But of course, what used to happen is we lived in a generation where our parents also used to send us to the rural areas. It was quite an exciting experience that during the holidays we would go, to meet our grandmothers, our grandfathers, our cousins, and so forth, which is why some of us managed to maintain both languages, Ndebele and Shona, because when we got home in Matebele land, we would speak perfect Ndebele, come back to Harare, speak perfect Shona, and we maintained that throughout. And fortunately for our family, we did not only visit our immediate family, but we visited, if we one holiday would go and visit my maternal grandmother, the other one we go to the paternal grandmother, grandfather, then we would even visit friends in Msengezi, in Gurure, and so forth. So that gave us that wide understanding of the people who were living with in the townships, because we'd say, I was in your area in Gurure and I was swimming in Mpinge River. I was in Msengezi, I was swimming in Msengezi River, and so forth. And it got exciting, especially when we met again, when we converged again after the holidays in the township.
Well, John, like I said, we're winding up now, but next Sunday I want you to come back and have a part 2 of this, because today we were really, people were following us. We couldn't really stop because we had a whole lot of things put together, but we'll try and break it down a little bit more next Sunday so that we'll talk a little bit more. I want you to come back. I know my followers would like to hear more about you in Township Boy, what it was like. I don't even want to go into, I know my friend Trevor.
Yes.
Trevor,
let's talk about Shiseru. Let's talk about one day. Let's talk about Nunu. Let's talk about Nono.
You know why? Because I said Trevor spoke to you about your being a journalist and what it was. I know you're from a family of a whole bunch of journalists, but I don't want to talk about that. I want to talk about living in townships in the 60s and 70s, what it was like. Maybe a little bit of what it was like for you to get.
Well, before the streets were lit, there was no electricity.
Anyway.
The roads, they were not tarred. Unfortunately, they've lost their tar again. So the roads were not tarred. The streets had no electricity, and we had the welcome dovers in our houses and so forth. So we'll talk about that. And we had teams which played a plastic ball along the road. And then we also had halls that like the youth or the center and so forth, Zororo, as well as Chengu, which was converted into a youth center, and other places like that.
Otherwise, we will not stop, John. I have to stop you right now because everybody's following us. Yes, please, let's do about that next week. Mazita, Masuku, Kanoiwanya, Wasangwadzi. You see, all these people are following me, and Wadzanai goes nice, Tete, Kanoi Sangwadzi, Kanoiwanja. You see, all these people are following us. I'm sure next week when they listen to this, and they know there's a part 2, we'll probably have more people. So I want to invite you next Sunday to talk about this again. So on that note,
well, thank you, Stuart.
You are welcome. I'll see you next Sunday. Just hold there for me when John exits the studio later. I want to talk to you before we go.
Okay, that's fine.
Thank you to all our followers for coming on just like that, because I had not promoted it. We'll be seeing you next Sunday again with John Masuku. Will be part 2 of John talking about township, living in the township back in the 60s and 70s. And thank you so much for following us. This is Sangwadzi Spiwe Kachiza Mafumo. I'll talk to you on Sunday. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. So I will see you on Sunday, John.
Yes, that's fine. That's fine, Spiwe. Thank you for having me.